Before we dive into models and terminology, I want to set the tone for this course. Organizational behavior is not about memorizing theories or labeling people. It's about understanding why people behave the way they do at work and how leaders can influence those behaviors in ethical and effective ways. Every leadership decision that you make, how you motivate, communicate, structure work, or manage conflict, rests on assumptions about people. This course helps you replace vague assumptions with evidence-based understanding. Organizational behavior, or OB, studies what people think, feel, and do in and around organizations. That sounds broad, and it is, because leadership itself is broad. Organizations are simply groups of people working interdependently toward a purpose. That means leadership problems are rarely technical problems alone. They're people problems, system problems, or both. When leaders say, "This shouldn't be hard," what they often mean is, "I underestimated the human side of this decision." OB gives us language and tools for that human side. Think about a high-performing employee who suddenly disengages. The technical work didn't change, but something about motivation, role clarity, stress, or culture probably did. Employers consistently say that interpersonal and leadership skills matter as much as technical expertise, often more over time. OB helps you build better personal theories. Instead of reacting emotionally or relying on instinct, you learn to ask better questions. What's really driving this behavior? What constraints are shaping these decisions? How might the system be reinforcing this outcome? This course is designed to make you more of an intentional leader, not just a more knowledgeable one. From the organizational side, OB helps explain effectiveness. Effective organizations don't just produce outputs. They align people, systems, and strategy. Think of organizations as open systems. Inputs come in, people, information, resources, and outputs go out, products, services, impact. Leadership sits in the middle of that system, shaping how well inputs are transformed. When organizations struggle, the issue is rarely effort alone. It's usually misalignment between goals and incentives, values and behaviors, or structure and strategy. For example, a company might say it values innovation, but punish risk-taking. That's not a motivation problem, that's a systems problem. Organizations are complex systems that live within and also depend upon the external environment. Effective organizations maintain a close fit with those changing conditions. The inputs, processes, and outputs are aligned with the resources that are available and the needs of the external environment. Transform inputs to outputs. Coordination is vital in the relationship among internal subsystems. Human capital refers to the knowledge, skills, creativity, and judgment people bring to work. Unlike technology, human capital is difficult to copy and impossible to fully automate. This is why leadership decisions matter so much. How leaders hire, develop, motivate, and support people directly shapes organizational performance. Investing in people is not just ethical, it's strategic. Organizations don't operate in isolation. Stakeholders include anyone who affects or is affected by the organization. Employees, customers, communities, owners. Leaders constantly navigate competing interests with limited resources. OB helps leaders understand how values influence those trade-offs. As a reminder, stakeholders, any entity who affects or is affected by the organization's objectives and actions, for example, employees, shareholders, suppliers, unions, government, etc. Those are all stakeholders. Organizations are more effective when they understand, manage, and satisfy stakeholder needs and expectations. The challenge is stakeholders have conflicting interests and firms have limited resources to satisfy all of the stakeholders. Personal values influence how corporate boards and CEOs allocate organizational resources. And values are relatively stable, evaluative beliefs that guide our preferences for outcomes or course of action in various situations. Corporate social responsibility, CSR for short, is associated with stakeholders. Organizational activities intended to benefit society and the environment beyond the firm's immediate financial interest or legal obligations. This creates a triple bottom line philosophy. Economic, survive and be profitable. Society, maintain or improve conditions. Environment, become greener. Evidence that a positive CSR reputation results in better financial performance, more loyal employees, better relations with customers and other stakeholders. Corporate social responsibility isn't just about public image. It's about long-term legitimacy and trust. Individual inputs and processes influence individual outcomes, which have a direct effect on the organization's effectiveness. Team inputs influence team processes, which then affect team performance and other outcomes. And then those team processes and outcomes affect the individual processes and outcomes. Organizational inputs and processes have macro-level influence on both teams and individuals. Systematic research anchor. OB knowledge should be based on systematic research, forming research questions, collecting data, and testing hypotheses. We can also use another anchor for org behavior, and that is evidence-based management, making decisions and taking actions on research evidence. Scientific method, not fads or trends and personal beliefs that are untested. Decision makers don't apply evidence-based management because they're often bombarded with popular press and non-research sources. OB knowledge is generic, difficult to see relevance to specific situations, and fads are heavily marketed so they seem convincing. Then there's perceptual errors bias decision makers towards popular and personal theories and ignore contrary evidence. Kind of like jumping on the bandwagon. And so we have to create a more evidence-based organization. We have to be skeptical of hype, be aware of new, revolutionary, or proven ideas. Embrace collective expertise, not charismatic stars and management gurus. Use stories and examples to illustrate, not as conclusive evidence. And take a neutral stance towards popular trends and ideologies. We can take a practical orientation anchor. We can use OB theories. OB theories need to be useful in practice. Implicit or explicit objective of making organizations is more effective. The true impact of an OB theory actually applied and valued in organizations. OB rests on several key anchors. First is systematic research. This field is grounded in evidence, not opinion. Second is practical relevance. If a theory doesn't help leaders make better decisions, then it doesn't even matter. Third is contingency thinking. There is no universal best leadership approach. What works depends on the situation. Finally, OB operates at multiple levels: individual, team, and organization. Leadership problems usually span all three. So anytime someone asks, what's the best leadership style? The correct answer is, it depends. Inclusive workplace is basically diversity is not just demographic, it's psychological. Deep level differences often matter more than surface level ones. It values people of all identities, allows people to be fully themselves while contributing to the organization. Diversity can be viewed as a value resource at an individual level and also at a collective level. Now, we have surface level diversity. That's that observable demographic, physiological differences in people, race, ethnicity, gender, age, physical capabilities. And that's increasing in many countries. Then we have deep level diversity, differences in the psychological characteristics of employees. That would be personalities, beliefs, values, and attitudes. For example, there may be differences across age cohorts, Gen X versus Gen Y or Gen Z, or even maybe some baby boomers that are still working. Some deep level diversity is associated with surface level diversity, for example, gender differences in values, attitudes, personality, things like that. When we talk about generational diversity, that's going to be more deep level diversity. Values, expectations, attitudes exist across generations, but differences are more subtle than many think. And differences also can be due more to a person's stage of life rather than their cohort, or decade of birth. There are benefits of diversity in the workplace. Inclusive workplaces tend to produce better decisions, better employee attitudes, better team performance. Teams with high informational diversity, meaning different knowledge and skills, make a more creative team. They can make better decisions in complex situations. Also, there's better representation to recognize and address community needs. Some of the challenges of diversity are diverse teams usually take longer to perform effectively together. It takes them a while to gel and fit together as a unit. And there is higher risk of dysfunctional conflict, less information sharing, and morale. In modern times, we talk a lot about work-life integration. Work and life are not separate containers, and we are learning this more and more since COVID-19. Stress in one role drains energy from others. Leaders influence this through expectations, flexibility, and role design. And there's increased blending of work and non-work for many employees. And that's influenced by the technology that we have today, globalization. And when we talk about work-life integration from a leadership standpoint, the degree that people are effectively engaged in their various work and non-work roles have a low degree of role conflict across those domains. Maybe this occurs because satisfying demands and experiencing positive emotions of our various segments of life. Our life roles are inherently integrated. Resources generated and consumed by one role can enhance or starve other roles. We've all seen people who have stuff going on at home and then they just have an off day at work. The problem is heavy demands of one role deplete personal resources and starve off another. For example, consuming most energy and time performing thinking about a job leaves insufficient time and energy for other life roles. Maybe you're distracted at your son's ball game. And so when we practice work-life integration, we're literally integrating two or more roles. Meetings while exercising, like the stand-up desk with the treadmill under it, things like that. Dogs at work, on-site child care. Another area that we practice work-life integration is flexible work scheduling. Attend meetings remotely from home, then flexible work next day, parental leave programs, things like that. We can also align work and non-work roles with personality, values, and other personal characteristics. We have to have boundary management. We have to be able to separate work from non-work time. MSoft is a completely remote distributed organization with no head office. Anti-malware's firms, 36 staff, work from their homes around the world. The CEO leads from New Zealand. He was previously from Austria. Their staff rely mainly on text messaging, which accommodates for limited English skills. It's easier to message in English than speak in English. And asynchronous nature of messaging. And that helps accommodate time zones, things like that. The CEO coordinates remote meetings throughout the day with people in different regions. Remote work is simply defined as performing the job away from the organization's physical work site. Most common is working from home or other non-client site away from the traditional workplace, but it could also include working at client sites. Remote employees typically are connected to coworkers, clients, and company data through some form of information technology. And a lot of companies, just like I mentioned earlier, are completely remote or distributed. There's no physical offices. All staff work remotely. As with anything, there are advantages and disadvantages to remote work. The benefits are better work-life integration, but it requires sufficient workspace and privacy at home. And this can be undermined by increased family responsibilities on telecommuting days. There's the valued work benefit, and this factors in a lower turnover of employees. It also yields higher productivity due to lower stress, transferring some commuting time to work time, ability to work when weather prevents office work. It's better for the environment, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, road use, etc. And it lowers corporate real estate costs. But on the flip side, remote work causes more social isolation because there's less connection with coworkers. There's less informal communication that helps career, that word of mouth information about promotional opportunities. And there's lower team cohesion and overall a weaker organizational structure. The bottom line is remote work improves flexibility and productivity for many, but it also creates risks: isolation, weaker culture, reduced informal learning. The question is not whether remote work is good or bad, but under what conditions it works. Now, when we think about remote work, we have to take into consideration contingencies. Those employee characteristics like high self-motivation. Are they self-disciplined? Do they start work on time? Can they work with low supervision? How organized are they? They need high self-organization, high need for autonomy. They have to have good skills with information technology and able to fulfill their social needs outside of work. Remote work requires certain job characteristics, tasks that don't require workplace resources, low task interdependence with coworkers, and also task performance has to be measurable. Remote work from organizational characteristics need the ability to reward employees for performance, not their presence or face time. Maintain team cohesion and psychological connectedness with the organization, maybe limit remote work days, have special in-person meetings or events, video communication, things like that. There are three main employment relationships. The direct employment, that's where the employee works directly with the employer. Indirect, maybe they're outsourced or it's agency work, or contract employee. Worker is a firm serving a particular client. There are some consequences of the emerging employment relationships in this changing workforce environment that we are entering. Direct employment tends to have higher work quality, innovation, and agility. There's lower turnover, higher commitment, more involvement, and more organizational investment in human capital. Direct employment workers tend to have lower satisfaction and commitment when working with indirect employment employment workers. Those indirect employment workers tend to have lower job satisfaction than do direct and contract employment workers. Teams with direct and indirect employment members tend to have weaker social networks and less information sharing. And managers experience more ambiguity in their roles and less discretion in guiding work performance of indirect employment workers. Now, what you see here on the slide, the MARS model explains why people behave the way they do at work. Behavior is shaped by motivation, ability, role perceptions, and situational factors. Leaders often focus on motivation, but performance suffers just as much when people lack clarity, resources, or skills. If someone is underperforming, leaders should ask, is this a motivation issue, an ability issue, a role clarity issue, or a systems issue? For example, if expectations keep changing, no amount of motivation will fix the confusion. MARS is built on earlier models of individual behavior performance. The idea is that performance equals the person times the situation. Person includes individual characteristics, and situation represents the external influences on that individual's behavior. Performance equals the ability times motivation. Skill and will model, two specific characteristics within the person. And the AMO, the ability motivation opportunity, refers to three variables, but with limited interpretation of the situation. There's some internal forces that affect a person's effort for that voluntary behavior. Internal forces are cognitive and emotional conditions, and that is what affects that person's voluntary behavior. The direction, that path along which people steer their effort. Motivation is goal-directed and it's not random. Intensity, the amount of effort allocated towards that goal, and persistence, continuing the effort for a specific amount of time. Natural aptitudes and learned capabilities are required to successfully complete a task. Aptitudes are natural talents that help people learn specific tasks more quickly and perform them better. Person job matching produces higher performance and tends to increase the employee's well-being. And so we have to select applicants who demonstrate the required competencies, provide training to enhance the individual performance and results, and then redesign the job so the employees perform only tasks that they're currently able to perform. Role perceptions are clearer, role clarity, when we understand which tasks or consequences we're accountable for, understand the priority of the task and the performance expectations, understand the preferred behaviors and procedures for those tasks. And there are obvious benefits of clear role perceptions. It's more accurate and efficient job performance due to clear direction of effort, better coordination with others, higher motivation due to a clearer link between the effort and the outcomes. Now, in this MARS model, we have two influences of situation on behavior. It can be a constraint or a facilitator, for example, time, budget, work facilities, consumer preferences, economic conditions, things like that. And then cues, those things that communicate information, such as safety warnings or other role obligations. Organizations care about more than task performance. They also depend on organizational citizenship behaviors, or OCBs. At the same time, counterproductive behaviors harm trust and effectiveness. Leaders shape all three of these, not through slogans, but through what they reward, tolerate, and model. I'm just going to run through briefly some of the differences. I'm sure you'll read about this in the textbook, types of individual behavior. One is counterproductive work behaviors. those voluntary behaviors that have the potential to directly or indirectly harm the organization. For example, harassing coworkers, creating unnecessary conflict, avoiding work obligations. Joining, staying with an organization, forming that employment relationship and remaining with them. And maintaining work attendance. Absences due mainly to situation, weather, motivation, maybe they're trying to avoid a stressful workplace. Presenteeism, attending scheduled work when one's capacity to perform is significantly diminished by illness or other